Welcome to Something Positive for Positive People. I'm Courtney Brame. Something Positive for Positive People is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that supports people who are struggling with herpes stigma, connecting them to community and mental health resources. I am your host, Courtney Brame. I think I just said my name already, but hey, you know how it is. We make mistakes, we leave them in because none of us are perfect. We're all human. Today I have Kim here with me. Kim, you are someone who has been around in, I want to call it the advocacy space for a pretty long time. Can you tell me how many years you've been an admin for the herpes support groups that you're a part of?
I think I've been an admin, whether it's in different states or groups, at least 6 to 7 years now, if not longer.
Yeah, so you've been in this for a minute.
I was in these groups before we even hit 1,000 people. So
Yeah.
long time.
I'm curious to know, what did your being an admin look like 6, 7 years ago, before that 1,000-person mark?
Oh, well, the 1,000-person mark was 12 years ago.
Oh.
Adminning 7 years ago. There was already thousands of us in these groups, but it was more local when I was in my hometown state. A lot of it was just, coordinating the events, getting people together to actually connect and meet each other and not just sit on computers and talk and, build the friendships that way, but it was getting out and engaging with each other and finding friendship.
Yeah. I'm curious to know, how did you yourself get started with taking on the responsibility of adminning the herpes support groups that you adminned?
Yeah, I think the first one started just with a very inactive group. So those that were in those admin roles were just there to, kind of regulate the group and not actually try to coordinate meeting and whatnot. Some of the states it's just hard because it's more spaced out and you don't have a local group that's, high in population numbers that are close by. So those events that we first hosted, a lot of them required travel, so people would come from other states even just to start engaging and whatnot. So,
all right. And when you talk about the inactivity of these groups, originally, were these supposed to be groups that fostered in-person community, or was it more for people to come and get herpes information, or what?
I would say back then, the very first one I started helping with, they were still new in the branching out into, having your state groups or regional groups. So not everyone knew what their intent was. Like, we have our national support groups and our regional groups for activities. The state groups kind of just formed just to get people connected to each other. And so then I think as the time went on and as I participated, engaging those meetups and stuff, it just evolved within that time.
Okay. And I'm curious to know, it is very, very, very challenging to find these support groups. Like for me, I'm someone who I have had herpes for 2022 will probably make my 9th year of having herpes. And I didn't find any of the support groups until 4 years into my diagnosis, shortly after I started this podcast. And I'm curious to know, how do you find people to join the groups?
I think it's kind of different for everyone. I've added people to our groups that were diagnosed the same day. It just depends on the outreach and what people are looking for when they get diagnosed. Some people instantly go to the internet now, and some people, they kind of just hone in on that internally, and they don't know where to reach out. I think there's a lot of dating websites now where a lot of us admin and other active members try to engage in, like, I don't know, we call it recruiting, letting people know what's out there. We have people in the group that, they reach out to their local doctors and medical facilities to, like, share the information too. So, like, before, when I was diagnosed, it was 21 years ago. So, there was nothing. And so it took me quite a long time before we found anything. So I think it can vary. It just depends on people's, want to learn more about their diagnosis and, not have that fear of, if I reach out to someone that I find on the internet, are they going to be okay? Are they a safe person?
Yeah, that speaks to something that I also wanted to touch on, which is just how much work really does go into the advocacy that people will never, ever understand unless they're a part of this. I've seen a few of the other admins with putting together events. I see what goes into it when I attend events and when I get to see people just interacting and living their best lives and socializing and connecting with one another. The space that you all as admins, as event planners and coordinators and recruiters have created is something that just doesn't get near as much praise as I get for just being someone who has the privilege of being open about my herpes status and receiving that like applause and whatnot. But like it's y'all, like without y'all and these spaces that you've created, I don't think that there would be as intense of an advocacy from me, because I feel like I owe it to someone like you or someone like some of the other admins who are out there doing the work that you all do, engaging with people directly and making them feel safe, making them feel good, empowering them to disclose their status and treat their symptoms and manage symptoms with various ways that they otherwise may not have come across or heard of if it hadn't been for you. So I say all of that to just thank you, first off, for putting together what it is that you have put together alongside all of the other admins that are out there.
Yeah, I really feel like, hosting large events is kind of like the treat. So instead of, taking it all on myself, working in your groups and, other people getting excited and wanting to bring people in. So I think that, I think the other group members kind of help in that recruiting part far more. I try to lean on the, let me give you incentive. Like, because, for me to be out there trying to, engage on dating apps and stuff like they do, my time has to get focused elsewhere. So I really tried to transition to kind of getting others to also take those roles on, so I think it's more important to get more numbers versus me making more effort.
Yeah. So. And it's something that is sometimes thankless, if you will. People are volunteering their time and just making the effort themselves to pull people into spaces of community, to wherever it's safe, wherever it feels safe. So if that's on the dating apps, if that's in spaces where people do have herpes and they know that they have herpes, like we're creating and have already created this sense of community through an adversity, through what can sometimes have been a traumatic event in our lives that we're able to connect over and bond over and have this sense of community to support healing through. So when we talk about the community, when we talk about the groups, when we talk about events, what we're talking about here is a saferly, a more safe space that fosters connection through something that is so stigmatized. And for you and the community that you're part of, built and currently now have access to, it's like you're not just a space where people come in and they vent about herpes. You're a space where people get to just be in presence with one another and have that shared sense of understanding of what each other have been through.
Yeah. I can speak to myself that my closest friends are all from the groups now. Like I've bonded, even the first people I met at my very first event out of state 11 years ago, I think it is now. Like they're still some of my best friends today. And there's countless times where, everyone's in different stages of their diagnosis, but once people accept their diagnosis, how many times I've heard them say, I'm so happy I got herpes, or I never would have found this community. So it's really kind of funny when you hear that, because, some people came in like, at the end of all hope, and now they've created bonds and they come to these events. And, the other bonus is I can travel almost anywhere and have a free place to stay.
Yeah, that's how I look at it too. Like with so many friends all over the place, like whether you've just said hi or exchanged messages or liked something or commented on something, there is still that shared sense of community. Like I feel like I can tap into the network if I have an event somewhere and I want to like crash on somebody's couch. I know that I can and like pay for dinner or something like that, drinks. I don't know, but that's a possibility, and that's a possibility that before having herpes, I think that my network of associates even or friendship or just people that I trust at a certain level was a lot more condensed, whereas now it's way more expansive. And again, it's through something that I never would have thought I'd have been like, oh man, because of herpes I now have friends all over the place, right?
Yeah, it's a game changer. I think, between the time I was diagnosed and it not being, we didn't have the same platforms on social media then, like I'm grateful that people can find us so soon now, even if sometimes it takes others a long time, having those people that come to me and it's their first day, the support and offer of, good words and kind words, it, that's the reason that keeps me around is, all the thanks that I get as far as that. Admin, yeah, it's a whole different story sometimes. But, just those individual connections and knowing that, I could pay it forward.
I was going to bring up burnout and compassion fatigue, and you've already kind of touched on it there with what makes this as rewarding as it does. Like you're volunteering your time to put all of the work in that you have put in. So I'm curious to know, like, are there any self-care practices for you in being as involved as you are with the groups and the socializing and the connecting and the sometimes venting, I'm sure, and any sort of like drama that can occur just from being inside a community? Like, what does taking care of yourself look like to minimize any burnout or compassion fatigue?
Yeah, obviously our adminning network has our own group. So we can reach out always and discuss things coming up. And then, you have your trusted friends that you can confide in for some things, your fellow admin. Other than that, I'll host one big event and then I go release all of that stress and be a participant at another event. So that's kind of the nice thing about that.
All right. And what happens at these events? I'm sure people are wondering, well, event, what does that mean? What is it? I've been to ones that have had recreational sports activities. We've had barbecues, pool parties, different like dating games and karaoke, bowling, playing at the arcade, Top Golf. There's all types of things. I went ziplining for the first time in Louisville. So there's all types of stuff that I can speak to from my experience. And these are just some of those things. But what are some of the things that other people have told you that they've really enjoyed about the groups or different activities that they've had experiences with?
Yeah, I think, a lot of it depends on location and what kind of activities you can get going. So, some people have their favorite national events. I love Florida and the beach. So that's always a good time. A lot of feedback with the event I host is it's very welcoming for newbies being in the area that I'm at. There's a lot of active members being added to groups all the time. And so that feedback was always shared that, this is a great icebreaker because everyone is just so welcoming. Some events get so large that, you do have friends that are old friends and kind of hang out with each other and whatnot. But, it's always just about creating that icebreaker. And then, the majority of everyone wants to just include and get to know everyone. So my event kind of stayed a little bit smaller. So we max out at 150. So we're not seeing those numbers of 400, and people just kind of feel lost in the crowd. So we get that, and a lot of it is just the new activities. They get to do things they never thought they were going to do. Zip lining, swimming with manatees, going out on the ocean, doing cruises. Some of the events have even turned international, so people are going over to Europe for events. I mean, the groups are international. So, Australia has a very large base, and then Europe, they've been starting to do travel events. There's travel groups where they all just create their own little cruise group, and then they go off on cruises. So, really, the opportunity is limitless when someone wants to step up and not just wait for someone else to plan stuff. And that's what I've noticed a lot more lately is more people are kind of trying to be like, hey, I want to do this. Anyone else?
Yeah.
And they're creating these impromptu little vacations and stuff. So it's good to see.
Yeah, that is. And I imagine that this is different since your diagnosis. And as someone who has lived with herpes for 21 years, can you speak to, I guess, really just share your story, like when you were diagnosed and then how you navigated that up until the point where you are now?
Yeah, so I was 18, 6 months into being active sexually, and I had a new boyfriend, and I didn't know like what was happening. I just was feeling sick, and he just kept trying to be insistent that it must just be something with the condoms. So in my mind today, it tells me that he probably knew what it was, but so I got the diagnosis and struggled through a very bad first outbreak. I had a doctor that walked in the door and handed me a box of Kleenex and said, it's herpes, don't have sex when you have an outbreak, and shut the door and just let me cry. So not only did he give me incorrect information, there was no compassion. So I thought the world was ending. But then, that went away. My boyfriend didn't leave me, and then it wasn't a thought at all. It turns out like I was asymptomatic. So years later, I did a blood test and found out I have HSV-1 genital. So I've been fortunate enough to live asymptomatically. And so the struggle for me was more mental and disclosing at first. Once I went through some more college health classes and learned you have to disclose. But then I got married, and it was after our divorce that I was like, how am I going to navigate this? And then that's when I got on the internet and I found an old dating website, and I made those connections to the people that were the original founders of the first group. So, as soon as that group kind of started with an idea of just a group of friends to have a different outlet on another outside platform of the dating website to chat, and then they decided to open that up to friends of friends, which then led to my friend being one of their friends. And so the group was a few hundred in, and I got added to the very first group, and that just kind of saved me. It gave me my own, not only was I fresh out of a divorce trying to navigate my own new friends and family that's not there, it just gave me somewhere for an outlet to find support and friendship. So then, I went to my very first event wasn't even a local event. It was a national event, and I just threw myself in there. And so after that, then, I just started engaging more. And then, as the group started breaking out into the smaller ones, then, I finally stepped up and tried to help take on some local stuff and activities to kind of pay it forward.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing all of that. I am disappointed at the care that you received upon diagnosis. You were given, it's like you just threw a grenade in the room and ran out. Like, it's herpes, pew, and then shut the door. But with navigating the mental health struggles, I'd like to put a little bit more time into that part of your experience, because for someone who's been diagnosed for 21 years, I think I've spoken to maybe a handful of people who were diagnosed for more than probably 10 years. And you're one of the few. So I'm curious to know, what were some of your mental health challenges, and how did you navigate that prior to having found the support groups?
Um, at first it wasn't really a thought based on what the doctor said, but then once I was back out in that dating world and had learned more things, it was really scary. And I think I was in that mental place of like thinking that someone needed to make me an exception at first when I disclosed, right? So, oh, I have this, and just, but then, you start to realize that it isn't about you being an exception. It's about you now becoming more aware of who you're choosing. So, you're not just choosing anyone that chooses you, right? So then I evolved to that. And then I evolved to, like sometimes someone could message me on a dating app, and my first response is my disclosure. It's like, I'd rather weave the people out that are going to judge it instantly than spend my time trying to get them to like me and then try to make me be an exception because they like me so much. So it kind of goes to like the complete opposite of it. It's like, accept it as it, and not because you're accepting it because you like me, because I don't ever want then, if you were to get it, then come back and say, well, I only did this for you. So I've always wanted the acceptance to be the diagnosis, not because of me tied to it at all. So I mean, today, in the last few years, like my life is, here's my diagnosis, I'm more than that, and I'm worth a lot more than that. So you can take it or leave it, basically. And I can pretty much, at the point where even educating, like if someone makes an ignorant comment, I can use my disclosure. And most times then it kind of puts people not in their place like in a rude way, but it opens their eyes to more education more times than I've ever gotten negative responses from doing it.
I wanted to ask you about your sex life pre-diagnosis versus after your diagnosis, but you didn't have one.
No.
It was just like, this happened.
Yeah, not much of one.
Yeah.
I mean, I was 6 months in. My boyfriend stayed with me at the time, and based off of my ignorance and believing that doctor, because, I mean, if you go back to, like, the 90s and sex ed, like, they talked about all of the diseases that you can catch from unsafe sex. They tell you you can go to jail if you didn't disclose HIV, but they never talked about how you tell someone, right? So that part is never in your head. Like, and honestly, they never really expand on the fact of a cold sore or a fever blister, whatever someone wants to call it, on their mouth is herpes and goes anywhere. So, it didn't cross my mind at those times. So, luckily I was asymptomatic, and I've never had anyone come back and say that they ever had anything. But then once I was divorced and living, I don't think my sex life was any different. I mean, I disclosed, and I can't remember the last time someone has rejected my disclosure, honestly. So
You did two things in what you just said that I really liked and want to highlight. One of which you explicitly said rejecting of your disclosure or rejecting of your diagnosis, not you. And then the last thing that you just said was you haven't had a disclosure rejected. I'd like to speak to that because I think in the front-facing advocacy, I've made the comment of a person just not being compatible with you, therefore y'all aren't gonna have sex or move forward if you disclose your status. Like, they probably just didn't like you, whereas you bringing your status to the forefront, it's more about them not liking herpes, not you. I would like for you to tell me, and maybe I'll be able to articulate this a little bit better, but this is just a new thought for me, so I'm kind of talking through it as it's coming. Talk me through your logic of seeing it as the person is rejecting your diagnosis, not you.
I guess the best way I could probably try to sum that up is, the earlier you're doing a diagnosis or a disclosure, I'm sorry, when you're meeting someone, especially dating online, all they know about you is what made them message you, right? And so there's nothing to dislike about you at that point other than that. A lot of people tell me, oh, I want to get them to like me before I disclose. Then you don't really know what is, and what is the reason. Like maybe now it's that plus these other things about you, and they put it all together, and maybe that's what they don't like. But if you just lay it out there and you're just honest up front, I've gotten more respect and thanks from guys from just putting it out there. And most times today, like in this dating world, not a lot of people are so ignorant. They have some knowledge, or most times, I like to always lead off with, have you ever had a cold sore or a fever blister? Because then that way, as soon as they say that, then you have leverage to try to explain what it is, right? And to kind of not get them to try to be above you at that point, because you guys are on the same level at that point. Because herpes is herpes, whether it's on your mouth or down there, and so the acceptance should be no different.
I don't know how you managed to come up with that, but it makes so much sense that, I mean, I hear mixed messages, but I don't think I've ever heard it articulated this way. And you just said it so simple, like reject my diagnosis, not reject me for my diagnosis. You said they reject my diagnosis. You're so detached from your identity is so not attached to your herpes diagnosis that when you experience rejection, it's not yours to experience. It's a rejection of this thing, not me. Is that kind of in the ballpark?
Oh yeah, definitely. Because I mean that's the truth. And whenever anyone reaches out and wants help, how do I disclose? I mean, the first thing is confidence, and don't let it lead you to needing to get accepted, right? So, the more confident you are in that, in separating it from it being like a baggage, right? It's just what it is. And if it was something that needed to be considered as baggage, then we'd have doctors testing for it. We'd have them tracking that and doing like the contact tracing. So I mean, it's not. It's an expected virus, and most likely everyone has been exposed to it, or there's that huge majority of people that do already have it, whether it's one or two or they're asymptomatic. So, I mean, if anything, if my disclosures just help, bring that knowledge to someone, and then they keep hearing it more and more, then maybe the person that's meant to be for them, they won't reject them for that status.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for elaborating on that so well. And because like I mentioned, people, I hear so many different versions of, well, it's a part of me. If you can't accept this, you can't accept me. Or this is something that comes with me. And yeah, it does. But I almost feel like people weigh their worth alongside whether or not someone chooses to be intimate with them after they disclose their herpes status. So it's like, just like you said, for people to be like, maybe I should make them like me first and then disclose. Like, what does that do for you if you've poured into this person, you've poured into the interaction, you poured into the relationship, and you've given them the best of you, as unsustainable as being on 10 you can't sustain being on 10 all the time. And then you slip in a herpes disclosure when a person decides to reject or accept your disclosure, your herpes diagnosis, then what? It's almost like you're setting yourself up for failure, because on one hand, if they reject it, now you've been so invested in this interaction that it has to be a blow to your ego to think, but I was so awesome to you, I was so good to you, and you've created this covert expectation that the more awesome you are, the more likely that person is going to want to be with you despite having herpes, right? And then on the other hand, if they accept you and you're on 10, what happens after they say, all right, that's fine, let's move forward? Do you then go, all right, I can stop doing this shit now. I can go back down to like a 5 or a 6 because this 10 shit is for the birds. And now you're in a situation where there's an inconsistency because the person that they accepted was on 10. And now after you've held your breath to stay on 10, you stop and you start breathing like normal and you start behaving like you normally would. Then what? And there's just this ongoing covert expectation of, if I'm the best person I can possibly be, then you're going to want me. There's no way you can reject me for being like this. And then either response that you get is potentially going to be self-sabotage in the relationship, rather than just coming in as you are and then, oh, hey, by the way, I have herpes. Is that a problem for you? Or have you had someone disclose to you before? Or even like you said, do you get cold sores or fever blisters? And then begin to segue into a conversation that way.
Yeah. Well, I think that being on 10, isn't that the struggle of every new relationship in dating these days? Whether it be with or without herpes. Yeah, I think, I get what you're saying. There's people I've talked to that, all they want is to just get to that stage that they're liked so much that nothing is going to make someone say no to them. But then that's putting the control in someone else. So you're giving control up, and I don't like to give control up. And so it's, have that confidence, be whole truth in what you expect and want when you disclose, if you're willing to get on daily medication, if you're not already, if you think or would be able to always use protection with them, or when do you not use protection after you've been in that relationship, expectations that you have in the bedroom, what you're willing to not do or do. I think, I've always been very adamant of, here's my disclosure. I expect to never be treated any different, and I expect nothing to be any different in the bedroom. Because a lot of times guys will be like, oh, well, yeah, I'd sleep with you, but I won't do oral, like silly stuff like that. And I'm like, no, buddy, like, we're living a normal sex life if you're going to accept me, And so, whether that takes precautions for so long beforehand, yeah, that's a whole different story. But, like, you're not going to withhold from me something because of that, because that's you still not accepting my status,
All right. I didn't expect for us to go here, but I want to be there, because that is something I hear fairly often. And it's actually something that I've experienced a couple of times now, where a partner is not okay with the risk of, they are okay or seemingly okay with the risk of having intercourse with a condom, but they will not go down on you, right? It's, or what I'm getting at is, it's always women. It's women. Women I hear from who are like, yeah, I've been with this guy for a while and he won't go down on me, but we'll have sex with or without a condom, but the guy just won't go down on them because they have herpes. And it's like, you are capable of having the kind of sex life that includes oral sex. If that's important to you, if that's something that you enjoy, why withhold that just for a percentage of the kind of sex that you could be getting, And I'm curious because you're a woman, so are you able to speak to this at all, like from whatever perspective? Because to me, it looks like that thing about self-worth, self-confidence, and being like, oh my God, great, someone accepted me, I'm gonna get to have sex. Oh, but I won't get to have oral sex. That's okay, it's sex. Sex is sex, and I'm getting acceptance. So outside looking in from a guy's perspective, that's what I see happening. What do you think?
I think it depends on what stage everyone's in. For me, I see a lot more people making better choices in partners and not, saying, yeah, I'll sleep with them just for anyone. It does happen, obviously, especially like if you have someone that's more like new from a long relationship, and they're just getting out there. and they've never had to deal with it, because there's a lot of people that come out very long marriages, and they were diagnosed together, or they got it right after that, and they made one bad mistake at the end of their divorce. And so, I can see, like, I'll see that more so in people like that, where it's just anything, even if you won't do something. But those that have sustained their diagnosis and have been dating, I see more people being more choosy to who they decide to date, because they've learned from their diagnosis, that a lot of them, it was a poor decision, so now I'm going to make better decisions, or I don't want to disclose to more people than I want to, because some people still are more fearful in being open about it, so they don't want to disclose unless they're seeing some potential, so it's kind of twofold at this point, what I see.
All right. And I want to be clear here that we're speaking from primarily a heterosexual standpoint. And in my personal experience, I've recognized that partners who don't want to go down on me are not actually okay with having sex with someone who has herpes. And when I now, in hindsight, damn, it's interesting. I wish I would have known or thought about this earlier, because I think I probably could have saved a handful of okay sex interactions, because like I don't want to have okay sex anymore. Like, sex is an overall experience, inclusive to, for me at least, oral and intercourse, and the touching, the sensuality of it, like it's a dance, if you will. And if we're not on the same wavelength, like if I want to do this move, I'm stepping to the right, you stepping to the left, like, hold on, what you doing over there? You're supposed to be over here. Like, we're not compatible dance partners, energetically speaking, if we can't have the experience. And part of that leads into, if you've listened to Something Positive for Positive People, episode 99, Integrative Disclosure, it touches on Dr. Evelyn Dacker's Stars Talk, where we talk about our turn-ons and avoids. So to be able to negotiate the expectations, if you will, of sex, or what your standards are for sex, of what you will do, won't do, what you need in the bedroom or car or room or kitchen, wherever it is that you're being sexually active, being able to communicate those kinds of things up front. And then, going into the sexual interaction, like, it's not going to be a surprise when you're like looking at a person and looking down at your genitals, looking at that person, looking down at your genitals, like, hey, you doing this or what? Or you go down on them expecting reciprocity and not receiving it. So I know better now that it's about communication. And I think that for me personally, my herpes diagnosis has made me a much better sexual communicator, because I've had to lean into the discomfort of speaking about my own STI status, and also still holding partners to the same standards that I would expect to be held to, which is not just disclosing and speaking to what the other person has, but also, like, when's the last time you've been tested? Do you know what you were tested for? Have you ever had an STI? These are conversations that can also occur within the realm of disclosing our HSV status. Kim, did you have something you wanted to add? I talked a lot, and I saw you kind of nodding a little bit.
No, I was agreeing with you. I think we all went down that road of, accepting things that we wouldn't have before. I mean, it's an evolution in coming to terms with your diagnosis.
Yeah, it's definitely an evolutionary process, and I can attest to that, because where I started and where I was when I first got diagnosed, and a few years after that to the point that I'm at now, I feel like these were completely different life cycles. Like, I was a different person in each of these parts of my life around STIs. And with the knowledge that I have now, with the experiences that I have now, I am hoping to be able to continue to bring the insights and the knowledge and the wisdom from veterans in this space who've been doing this advocacy in the I caught myself about to say archaic, like old school. I don't know what to say, but I want to use my privilege, use this new media to bring the wisdom of your experience, of other admins' experience, of other people who've been in these support groups for a long time to the forefront, so that not only we can get more involvement from the community, because I feel like it's so separated that you have to be in the right place at the right time with the right person with the right message in order to know that any of these social support groups even exist. And it's kind of like a cool kids underground club. You know, if you do have herpes, you have to be willing to put yourself out there in a way that can be seen by someone who is connected to or involved with these HSV support groups in order for you to be let in. But I think that this kind of a conversation is something that inspires people to reach out. I think that it inspires people to also become advocates in their own way, and advocates for community, advocates for the groups, advocates for the events, and also advocates to the point where, just like you disclose to people up front. Your disclosures to people who might not have herpes or might not be aware of what their herpes status is, that's how we create allyship. So being able to dissolve stigma within ourselves just enough to where we can confidently disclose to sexual health partners or potential partners, and then even in that experience, we create a sense of allyship. That sense of allyship is what it's going to take in order for us to completely dissolve stigma. And I mean, we're definitely a long way from there, but we're always making progress as long as we're willing to participate in the creation of allyship through something as simple as disclosing to potential sexual partners and looking out, reaching out for support. Oh, I didn't know if you, I didn't know if you had anything to add to that.
I guess, I mean, the one thing I could say is the majority of the groups are also open to HPV status. So if you have either or, so I think that's one of HPV is very common. I'm finding more and more people that are coming into the groups that are actually having both statuses, even HIV positive and HSV or HIV and HPV, and so it's trying to find a realm for them as well, so as everything evolves in acceptance of disclosures, whether the status is now, especially when you can have undetected HIV statuses. So, I think, there's room to even get more support and stuff out there for them.
Yeah. And maybe one day we'll get to a point where our HSV status can be detected or undetectable as well. So science is coming a long way. We're doing good. And we just gotta encourage allyship, and in doing so we have to be allies for ourselves and with one another. Kim, I thank you very, very much for taking the time to speak with me and share some insights about your experience, what it means to navigate these support groups, the social groups, the events. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. It was fun.
I'm glad. I could tell you were a little bit nervous at first, but as the conversation went on, you loosened up a little bit and you stopped saying,
That's just part of my upbringing up here now. So obviously I'm up north.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's better to go in blind and then you don't overthink what you're about to say. So
I appreciate that. It makes for a much more organic conversation, and I want people to know that they can come here and say what they need to say and just feel like they're having a conversation, because that's what this all started as, is just me having conversations with people who were at an okay place with their herpes diagnosis for the sake of getting this information and that conversation in front of people who were not at an okay place with their diagnosis. So I appreciate your energy. I appreciate your time. And we will reconnect around the time I'm posting this podcast episode, and I'll let you know about it.
Perfect.
All right, Kim, thank you so much. You have a great rest of your day.
You too. Bye.
That concludes this episode of Something Positive for Positive People. Please like, rate, review, subscribe to, share, donate to this podcast, nonprofit organization. We are continuing to build a network of therapists, hopefully across each state, so that when people reach out, we're able to already have that connect in place, and continuing to raise money in order to be able to pay for it for people, so that if you're struggling with herpes stigma, you can come get yourself a therapist and you can deal with the things that the herpes diagnosis oftentimes uncovers, and whatever trauma there is or may be surrounding that, begin the healing process for it. And if you're someone who can't afford therapy, and if we're not at where we need to be as far as being able to pay for it, I'm working on it, I promise, then I can connect you to support groups, social groups, as well as additional resources. And of course, this podcast is a great resource. We've got over 220 episodes of lived experiences from people. That's 4 years worth of content, going on 5. We're on our 5th year of having this podcast and being able to interview people weekly. I remember starting out, I thought that maybe we'd have one interview per month or something like that, but it's really wild to see how, the sharing of one podcast led to 2 more people wanting to get involved, to 4 people, and then 8, and 16, 32. So yeah, here we are, and this is a resource now, and it's our resource, by us, from us, for us. And as we continue to share these experiences and welcome in allyship, I think that people who don't have herpes are going to start listening to this podcast and having this understanding, and we'll get this into the medical community. And when people talk about STD prevention, that they'll begin to incorporate the lived experiences of people who have had to navigate STI stigma, taking the communication lessons that we've all learned and begin to integrate those into what I hope to be considered STI minimization. And you, the listener, whether you're a past guest, whether you're a donor, whether you're a sponsor, all of you have put your energy into this space, making it what it is. And I hope that you're proud of this. I hope that you're proud of the growth. I hope that you're proud of the development, and that you are able to see just the impact that's being had. I see it on a daily basis whenever I get the messages, whenever I get engagements in posts, or when people reach out to me or email me. And I just get to see it. I get to see people living their life the way that they want to, despite having herpes. And that's really what this is all about. Just come here, get what you need, and then be able to leave. If you need something, then come back to it. But live your life along the way. And once again, as I always say, sexual health is mental health. All right, so keep that in mind. And till next time, stay sex positive. I didn't even know you was here. I thought you was leaving.
I know